This debate happens in a predominantly white countries, in which it has a very strong numbers and majority of white people, right? But we also don't think that this debate only happen with that kind of demographic. We think that this demographic will also reflect into how this majority of people will live in that particular countries, right? They will think of their way of life will be based on the culture of their white heritage itself. They will most likely run their own culture and will not accept the other cultures. We think that that is the context in which these debates happen. This debate does not only happen in the countries that all the people suddenly accept this kind of differences, for example, like Australia and such. But we think that this debate will happen in a more specific community, for example, like Texas, in which most of those people are actually white people, right? But they also live their life believing that white people are the ones that belong to that particular place, right? Therefore, we think that this is something that is very important, because most of these white people in that particular context will not accept outsiders, right? Especially immigrants. Therefore, we think that this debate should operate in that kind of context. What is the problem that we see in the current status quo? We think that these people who are first generation immigrants, meaning that they are fresh from that particular place, right? They have been living with the different cultures in which the place they want to go to. For example, like an Indian people, they have been living with an Indian background in India, right? So in the moment they move to Texas, for example, they will lose this. They will suddenly lose this kind of background. They will lose this kind of cultures to begin with, right? Therefore, we think that this is some. Meanwhile, this culture is something that they hold on to, right? Because this is something that they just cannot easily adapt to with this kind of significant differences. For example, like language or way of life, that is something that is very important for them, right? Therefore, we think that the need for community to both guide them and also protect them is something that is so important and integral towards this process of assimilation. Second of all, why do we think that that living in an ethnic enclave society is the solutions, right? Because we believe that ethnic enclave society, for example, like Little India or Chinatown, right? This is something that is very important for them in order to protect the culture and also protect their future generations and also the cultures that they have been living throughout their life. Okay, what do we think is the urgency here? First of all, we think that first immigrant holds on to their own culture because they are fresh from that old environment. For example, like their way of life, customs, they live with less modernization, for example. They live with more conservative clothing or even attire or even different kinds of food. We think that this is something that is very important for them. Why? Because this is something that has been generationally passed for them, right? They have spent a lifetime in that environment. They have the familiarity with that kind of way of life, which creates them to have that kind of identity. Those way of life have become their own identity, right? Therefore, if you live outside, it is very hard to adapt for it, ladies and gentlemen. It needs time. Sudden and significant change will create culture shock, for example, for these first generation parents. Therefore, they need a community with similar identity in order to help them in this kind of assimilations at the end of the day. Second of all, why do we think that as a minority community, communal needs are important? We think that for a minority people who have fought for ages for the acceptance that they have got, when a minority community can build such a strong community that defines the whole area of a particular place, we think that it means that the community is strong, right? Therefore, it needs future generation who can strengthen it, for example, to hold on to that particular idea, who have the same communal needs in order to protect each other and also pass the culture in which we will also explain to you as to why this kind of culture is important. So, why do we think that it will be effective to protect and to protect the culture and also the community itself? We think that by staying in that community, we'll build a strong bondings and also a sense of unity, right? Because they have a similar culture, which is easier way of life for them to adapt to, which is not a sudden change, right? Therefore, they in that particular place is not an outsider. Therefore, they will receive less discrimination at the end of the day. And also, why do we think that by raising their children in the community will effectively protect the culture and also protect the future children themselves, right? We think that by staying in that particular community, community, they will pass the culture inheritance, right? Because this community will teach them that this is something that belongs to them, that this is something that is very important. If you live in a white neighborhood, for example, you will lose these kinds of things because you are doctrinized with the idea of modern development, in which will create you to lose this kind of cultures. For example, your child will stop wearing what the cultural attire, for example, and instead, because they have been living in that kind of situation, they will not be accustomed to it and will turn against their own culture. They will feel like their parents are annoying for forcing them to do something like that, and in order for them to forget their culture and even hate them, right? Because they think that this is something that is not right, that doesn't belong to them, compared to the past generation who have suffered for a long time of suffering and also discrimination because of the culture that they fight for. Therefore, they hold on to it, right? Now, this kind of young generation, they are too comfortable with living in this kind of situation. Therefore, they will start more than ever will lose this kind of culture that their parents have held on to by generations. Why do we think that this is particularly important? Because they will, at the end of the day, they will remember the importance of this work. For example, when they are grown up and realize what they have lost, which is their culture. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement. At the end of the day, when they see that their own community are being discriminated, it will lead to cultural awakening, right? They will start to realize the importance of their own culture and no longer feel ashamed by it. For example, black people have been owning braids, curly hair, and etc., owning it as their own culture, because now they have seen that their own culture are being discriminated. It brings a sense of pride to them, right? Therefore, we think that this is something that at the end of the day, they will feel the importance of. When they are faced with this kind of discriminations, when they have a sense of community, they will have a place to turn to, who will accept them, who will ease their pains, and more important, to protect them, which is a sense of community. Compared to when they are not in that kind of community, they will lose their culture and have no place to turn back to learn the culture in which they realize is important and for protection from that kind of discrimination. Closing, opening government proudly propose this motion. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, why is it important for a Mexican American, why is it important for Asian American or even African American to eventually believe on their own cultures at the end of the day, right? Because, you know, look at the background of the first generations immigrant in the past, right? So they relocated to completely a new place in a foreign country itself, right? We think that it was such a horrific experience to begin with, right? Just because they want to get, you know, a new life at the end of the day, right? So oftentimes that these people of African American, Asian American, or any other, you know, ethnic should compromise themselves with a new setting of life in the past, right? And it was really hard to do because, you know, in the current status quo, the reasons why we have Little India, for example, or Chinatown in the United States of America, it means that we have created a strong sense of community base in that predominantly white country, you know, regardless of, you know, the problems that we faced in the past, right? So in the event that we have already established such strong base of community in the current status quo, that even if, you know, that even it is to the extent that we have our own area and that particularly a white major society, it shows you that, you know, the legacy is already there that is being created by these people. The idea of your community, it's already exists in that setting, right? It proves to you that, you know, the survivability of our community, the survivability of Asian American, African American, or any other ethnics, right? That despite our unprivileged background, we are now success, right? We strive for a better life and we have accomplished all those things, right? Therefore, it is important for us to teach our children that kind of notions, right? Because, you know, first, it is to pass the legacy as well as to protect the long preserved cultures that we have been preserving for the, you know, for years and for decades, you know, that we stand unbothered in a society full of foreign cultures other than you, right? And second of all, why is it, you know, important is that it is to maintain the sense of belonging of these children to the community community like we did in the past, right? So why is that the case? Because we see that in the current status quo is that children, Indian children, for example, who lives in America or in any other predominantly white society, they are easily being influenced. They are being, brainwashed by other things. It is to the extent that, they are forget about their own cultures. So what it's likely to happen? So this is the comparative. So, comparatively with the first immigrant, it was hard for us in the past to even strive for happiness that we achieved in the current status quo. Therefore, we thought that it was better for us to stick to the community because, at the end of the day, the community is the one who is gonna help us. Therefore, we need to stick to the community itself, right? By that, it creates a strong sense of belonging to the community by yourself, right? Compared to the current immigrants who have become a new citizens in the United States, for example. So most likely, these children is detaching themselves from the culture. For example, if you've watched Never Have I Ever movie, that is a perfect portrayal of current Indian American who lives in the United States of America. This person hates her own background, so because this person brainwashed by the comfortability of being part of other community, that they are being brainwashed because of the comfortability that they have right now in the current status quo by living in the predominantly white countries and societies, right? So these situations will eventually lead to the current existing African American or even Asian American to eventually abandon and the identity that their descendants have been trying to preserve right now, right? And as a first generations of immigrants, we don't want that to happen because we don't want to simply forget why are we even here in the very first place. We don't want to forget, the suffering that we've been through and the victory that we have achieved in the current status quo right now. Because in the past, life was hard in a completely strange and foreign place, right? So culture was the only one that we can hold on to in the past, and that's the only thing, that can help us in the past. So because of this warmth of the community that they offer, therefore we want to, teach our children, this community has such a warm things to offer, and therefore you have to give back to the society, to the community that once helped you in the past, right? So what's the impact under opening government side of the house? So as Fajar has stated to you is that the goal of opening government is to the culture preservation, right? So with the current situations, the current climate of decreasing number of future generations who don't really hold on to the idea of culture itself, it creates such individualisms that they detach themselves from the community itself, right? It can eventually, when you teach them, it can eventually help these future generations to finally realize that communal setting is really important, that it will help them realize that the culture is culture is something that they will come back to at the end of the day, right? So see right now in the current status quo, we have a lot of attacks on minority groups such as black people. We have attacks on Chinese people because of this coronavirus thing. So we have faced a lot of any kind of discriminations. But these discriminations can eventually be comforted when you are in the community itself, right? Because that community will become your echo chamber at the end of the day, that they will comfort you that there's nothing wrong with our culture, so therefore we have to preserve that, and that echo chamber will eventually help us to strive harder in the future, and as well as not forgetting about who we are at the end of the day. Because of those reasons, very proud to close the debate of opening government. Thank you.